The word filioque is likely the most divisive word in all of church history.
We can't be friends.
For those that don't know, it's a single Latin word that's translated into English as "and from the Son" that was added to the Nicene Creed hundreds of years after its composition. This word was the catalyst that led to the Great Schism of 1054 AD that split the Western and the Eastern churches, creating both Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy. While both groups affirm the Nicene Creed, the Eastern Church has the original wording, whereas the Western traditions of Catholicism and Protestantism recite the version with the Filioque clause. Now, while I have no issue affirming belief in the Filioque, I side with the Eastern Church in wishing that it wasn't added, and that's because of the way that it was inserted was very troubling.
Very troubling.
So in today's video, I'll give you the background history of this clause and talk about how Western traditions are striving towards ecumenicalism by omitting the clause themselves. So first, let's take a look at the clause in its larger context. Here they are side by side. So the original version without the filioque says, "I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life, who proceeds from the Father." But with the filioque, here's what it says. "I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord, the giver of life, who proceeds from the Father and the Son." So what the Filioque teaches is that the Holy Spirit does not just proceed from the Father, but from both the Father and the Son.
Both of them?
A key text in this debate is John 15:26, which states, "But when the Helper comes, whom I will send to you from the Father, the Spirit of truth who proceeds from the Father, he will bear witness about me." Now, notice in this text that Jesus himself says that the Spirit proceeds from the Father, just like the Creed originally stated. However, defenders of the Filioque will point out that Jesus says just before that he will send the Spirit from the Father, highlighting their joint involvement in the sending of the Spirit. But this is not just a theological debate, but one of authority. So the Nicene Creed was formulated at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. The council was not a regional, but an ecumenical council, meaning it had input from Christians all over the world, which also lends to its credibility and authority. Now, the Nicene Creed was actually modified at the Council of Constantinople in 381 AD, and the modern Nicene Creed that we recite today is actually the version from that council. And that's why it's sometimes called the Nicene-Constantinopolitan Creed. But that's not controversial because it was modified at an ecumenical council with the approval of all churches, and thus it's accepted by all branches of Christianity. That approved version does not have the Filioque clause though. That was not added until 200 years later after Constantinople at the Third Council of Toledo in 589 AD. First, I want to give a little history on this Toledo Council. It was called by King Ricard I, who ruled the Visigothic kingdom.
Uh-oh. Make room, Visigoths.
Now, the Visigoths were a well-known Arian tribe. Arianism was the heresy that denied the divinity of Christ.
That is heresy.
And this was the reason that the Council of Nicaea was called in 325 to settle the Arian debate once and for all. So that means the Visigoths were originally opposed to the Nicene Creed. However, King Ricard converted to Nicene Christianity and united the kingdom under that belief. So the Council of Toledo was called by the king, who was also a participant, making a full recantation of Arianism, as did many of the local bishops there who attended. This council was thus a major turning point for the Visigoths, and this council was a public declaration of the acceptance of Orthodox Christian teaching.
Orthodox, Jerry.
Now, the Filioque clause makes a little bit more sense in light of this, because their goals in coming from Arianism was to emphasize their affirmation of the divinity of Christ. And what way shows the divinity of Christ more fully than the Holy Spirit not just coming from the Father, but from the Son too, because the Son is co-equal with the Father.
They're both equal.
But the Eastern churches had concerns about this insertion, thinking that the wording undermines the monarchy of the Father, which disrupts the distinctly Trinitarian relationships of the Godhead, like the Father being the sole source. Now you might say, okay, it was a little late, but the Nicene Creed was changed once before, so why couldn't it be updated again? Especially when it's just a single Latin word.
It's one word.
Well, the issue is that Toledo wasn't an ecumenical council, but a regional council. It took place in Toledo, Spain, and it was composed solely of bishops from the region of Portugal and Spain. So at Nicaea, you have an ecumenical council that gathered Christian leaders from all over the world. And then again at Constantinople, another ecumenical council is gathered, and they all agree on the updated wording of the creed. But then 200 years later, a regional council is called without the input of the larger church, and they change the text of an established creed? Well, that's not right. A small group of Christians from one region should not be speaking for the universal church, especially when the universal church is not being gathered to discuss the merits of such a change. Now, to be fair to the Council of Toledo, we don't know for sure if they intended to make a change to the creed. See, the original creed was written in Greek, and they were reciting it in Latin, so they may not have intended to add to the creed, but may have thought that's what the original Greek said. Communication and the accessibility of information was nowhere near what it is today, and there's always some variance when you're translating from one language to another. That the change was unintentional was articulated in a 2003 joint statement by the Catholics and Orthodox. Here's what they said. It appears that the Spanish bishops and King Ricard believed at the time that the Greek equivalent of the Filioque was part of the original creed at Constantinople, and apparently understood that its purpose was to oppose Arianism by affirming the intimate relationship of the Father and the Son. But that's not the only view, and the joint statement between the Lutherans and the Orthodox in 2024 tends to view the Council as doing more of an intentional insertion. They say, "We know that the Filioque was inserted in the Nicene-Constantinopolitan Creed by the Latin Church in response to the heresy of Arianism centuries after the Nicene-Constantinopolitan Creed's composition. The Eastern Church has always protested this insertion." So in that view, it was inserted deliberately to combat Arianism, which the Visigoths were known for.
So you did that intentionally?
Now, while their intentions matter for how we view the participants, their intentions don't matter for the actual issue at hand, which was the Western Church eventually accepting the modified version of the creed. Though the Filioque led to the splitting of the church in 1054 AD, tempers are no longer as high, and the desire for ecumenical relationships has grown.
Can we be friends?
There have been a lot of progress since the 1960s, starting with the Second Vatican Council, to clarify misunderstandings and make concessions. There have been many joint Orthodox dialogues with Catholics as well as Protestant groups. For example, in 1995, the Roman Catholic Church put out a document addressing some of the Orthodox concerns. The official Vatican statement says this: "The doctrine of the Filioque must be understood and presented by the Catholic Church in such a way that it cannot appear to contradict the monarchy of the Father, nor the fact that he is the sole origin of the Spirit." So they say that their understanding of the Filioque is not teaching a different theology than what the undivided church holds to.
We're saying the same thing.
They also affirm the primacy of the Greek version of the creed in 381 by saying this: "The Catholic Church acknowledges the conciliar, ecumenical, normative, and irrevocable value as expression of the one common faith of the Church and of all Christians of the symbol professed in Greek at Constantinople in 381 by the Second Ecumenical Council. No profession of faith peculiar to a particular liturgical tradition can contradict this expression of faith taught and professed by the undivided church." Then in 2003, there was a joint Catholic and Orthodox statement that concluded with a series of recommendations, with one being that the Catholic Church, as a consequence of the normative and irrevocable dogmatic value of the Creed of 381, use the original Greek text alone in making translations of that creed for catechetical and liturgical use. Now, with regards to Protestants, the Anglican Communion recommended the removal of the Filioque from the Nicene Creed in Anglican liturgies to foster unity. And then in May 2024, a 40-year dialogue between the Lutherans and Orthodox were concluded with a joint statement which recommended, "We suggest that the translation of the Greek original without the Filioque be used in the hope that this will contribute to the healing of age-old divisions between our communities and enable us to confess together the faith of the ecumenical councils of Nicaea and Constantinople." Now, I'm personally encouraged by these discussions with the Orthodox and support Western churches going back to the original wording of the Creed as stated in 381. Now, having said that, I'm not on a crusade against the Filioque. The Western churches have made sufficient clarifications that they're not espousing a different theology of the Holy Spirit than what the East holds. The church that I'm a member of sings the Nicene Creed on a regular basis, and it contains the Filioque clause. I don't hesitate to sing it with gusto because I believe it to be true, and it's now an established part of the Western tradition for the last 1400 years. But the Anglican Book of Common Prayer that I use, published by the ACNA, puts the Filioque clause in brackets, noting that it's not original to the Creed. And while they acknowledge that it's fine to recite, they state that they're committed to global unity and want to implement the recommendation of the 1978 Lambeth Conference to not use it in their liturgies. I think that that's better, and I hope that those engaging in ecumenical relationships will continue to make compromises to heal this centuries-old divide. Now, if you want to dig deeper on this topic, pick up the book The Filioque, History of a Doctrinal Controversy. This was published by Oxford Studies in Historical Theology and is the authoritative text from an academic perspective. It's actually the first complete English language history on this topic written in over a century, and so it goes over the history and the theology. If you want to dig deeper, this is the book to get. I've got the link for it in the YouTube description. Hey, before you go, if you found this video helpful, would you mind giving it a like on the way out? Also, if you want something else to watch, YouTube recommends that you watch this one right here. And if you want more content like this in your feed, you can subscribe right here. Thanks so much.